I am Gregory Hallows, and this is Preserve Halloween Podcast. So, we're going to continue our series on Yule. On this episode, we're going to start exploring the days and nights of Yule individually. All 12 of them. This episode will tackle 4 of them, and we'll do that more in depth. So we can kind of see a little brief history and where and why these traditions remain so important, historically, spiritually, for whatever reason. These are things that are important to learn about. So before I get into that, I did want to shout out 2 people, Michael Rockwell. Thank you so much for the donation. I got that the other day, and I forgot to mention it on the last episode. And also thank you to Rebecca Swainer. She wrote an article for the Pagan Grimoire all about how to celebrate the 12 days of Yule, Norse history and rituals. I used some of that to kind of fill in some important information on my podcast today, so I wanted to give credit where credit was due, and I will post a link for that website so that you can read about the rituals more in depth. Very, very good information. So wanted to make sure I mentioned that. So let's start. There was a time when winter was not a season you endured politely, but a force you negotiated with. Long before electric light softened the night and modern calendars told people exactly when to celebrate, the year bent and groaned under the weight of darkness. The sun slipped lower each day, the land hardened, and the world grew quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like a held breath that might never be released. Yule began not with joy, but with awareness. The longest night arrived not as an event, but as a realization. The sun had stopped climbing. It hovered low, fragile, distant, as if deciding whether the world below was worth returning to. This pause terrified early cultures because it represented uncertainty at a cosmic scale. There were no guarantees, only ritual, memory, and fire. And if you remember, the last episode kind of delves into that uncertainty and how could it... just imagine being a human way back then and not knowing whether the sun was going to come back. So that's insane. I can't even imagine that. But when the sun finally disappeared beyond the horizon on that first night, homes across the northern world became sacred spaces. Doors were closed not to shut the world out, but to define a boundary between what was known and what was not. Hearths were cleaned carefully, not scrubbed, because to sweep too thoroughly during Yule was to sweep away luck, protection, or even the spirits themselves. The first night of Yule was Mother's Night, Modernit, the oldest historically attested midwinter ritual in the Germanic world. The 8th century English monk Venerable Bede records it in the De Depurum Ration as the Anglo-Saxon pagan New Year, held on what would later become Christmas Eve. Now, this was not a celebration of motherhood as comfort. It was a reckoning with lineage, with the undeniable truth that survival was inherited, not guaranteed. Mother's Night honored the unseen chain of women who had carried families through famine, childbirth, war, and winter after winter after winter. The dead were closest on this night, especially the maternal dead. Offerings were prepared in silence, bread was broken by hand, milk warmed gently, meat set aside before anyone else ate. These offerings were not gifts so much as acknowledgments, payments of respect to those who had once done the same for the living. In some households, food was left at the hearth. In others, it was buried beneath floorboards or placed near ancestral objects. Where it went mattered less than the intention behind it. Names were spoken quietly, sometimes aloud, sometimes only in the mind. names of mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, women whose stories had blurred into fragments. Still, their influence was believed to remain. These ancestral mothers were thought to guard the household, to watch over children, livestock, and the fragile line between life and death. Dreams on Mother's Night were feared and welcomed in equal measure. It was said that ancestors spoke most clearly when the sun was weakest. A comforting dream could carry reassurance for the coming year. A disturbing one was not dismissed. It was examined, discussed, remembered. Warnings were never ignored during Yule. The fire burned low and steady that night. No roaring flames, no excess. The mood was one of reverence rather than fear. The living acknowledged that they were not alone, and they never truly had been. When dawn arrived, pale and reluctant, it did not bring relief, only permission to continue. The second night belonged to the sun. And this was the night of Joulblot, the great solstice offering, the moment when the sun, having reached its lowest point, was believed to turn, slowly, invisibly, back toward the world of the living. This return was not something you observed, it was something you earned. The Joulblot was the centerpiece of Yule. It involved a sacrifice to Freyr, the Norse god of fertility, peace, and prosperity. It also included a giant feast and oath-making known as the Bragaful. The Joulblot was built on exchange, life for life, gift for gift. Animals slaughtered on this night were chosen with care. Their deaths were not acts of cruelty, but acknowledgments of reality. Winter demanded sacrifice. Blood was something caught and used to mark doorways, tools, or sacred objects. This was not superstition, it was protection. A declaration that this household understood the laws of survival. The feast that followed was deliberate and grounding. Heavy food meant to fortify body and spirit alike. Ale flowed, but drunkenness was discouraged. This was not revelry, it was communion with the gods, with the land, and with each other. The Yule log was fully lit now, often oak, sometimes ash or yew, trees that symbolized endurance, death, and rebirth. The log was fed offerings before it ever touched flame. Ale poured along its grain, words spoken over it, hands laid against its bark. Once lit, it was not allowed to burn unattended. To let the Yule fire die was to invite catastrophe. People watched the flames as though watching the future itself. The crack of wood, the rise of sparks, the way smoke drifted, all of these were signs. Silence often fell as families read the fire, interpreting what they saw through the lens of tradition passed down by those long gone. Evergreen branches were placed on doors and windows, not as decoration, but as defiance. Even in death, life persisted. Even in winter, green endured. We'll be right back after this quick break. I am Gregory Hallows, your voice behind the Preserve Halloween podcast and founder of the Halloween Preservation Society. Halloween is more than a holiday. It's history, folklore, and a tradition worth protecting. If you love the stories, the research, and the deep dives into Halloween I bring you, please consider supporting the Preserve Halloween podcast. Your support can help me with more research opportunities, including travel to locations relevant to Halloween history, and to bring you even more insight into the world's greatest holiday. Every one of your contributions, no matter the amount, helps keep the jack-o'-lantern glowing just a little bit longer. So support the show if you can, help me preserve the past, and keep Halloween history alive for generations to come. Check the links in the show description to find out more. And thank you. And now, back to the podcast. The third night turned attention away from sky and ancestors and toward the land itself. This was the night of honoring the Vater, spirits of the land and home that protect, bless, and interact with humans if treated respectfully. That's a big if. The land spirits were older than gods in many traditions. They were not distant or abstract. They lived where people lived, in hills and rivers, in fields and boundary stones, in barns and wells. They were believed to be the soul of the place itself. During Yule, when boundaries weakened, the Vater were especially aware of human behavior. Respect was essential. Offerings were taken outdoors despite the cold, milk poured into the soil, bread buried in fields, ale spilled deliberately at the edges of property. These acts acknowledged that the land sustained the household and that gratitude was owed. Behavior changed on this night. Loud voices were avoided. Careless laughter was discouraged. To mock unseen forces was to invite attention, and not the kind anyone wanted. Masks were sometimes worn when stepping outside after dark, not to frighten spirits, but to confuse them, to move among the unseen without drawing notice. Children were warned not to wander, not because something would immediately seize them, but because the land itself was awake. And when the land listened, words and actions carried weight. By the fourth night, the tension that had been building since the solstice reached its breaking point. And this was the night of the wild hunt, one of the most fearsome and liminal aspects of Germanic and Norse winter folklore. It was believed to be a ghostly procession of dead souls, led by a powerful god or spirit, often Odin, but in other regions by Frau Perchta, Hel, or Holda. The hunt was not a story told to scare children. It was a warning encoded in myth, a reminder that the dead did not always rest quietly, and that justice did not always come gently. The wild hunt was said to ride the winter sky, an unstoppable procession of spirits, hounds, and riders torn from the boundary between worlds. The leader's name changed from place to place, but their role did not. They hunted oath breakers. They hunted the arrogant. They hunted those who disrespected the dead or ignored the old laws. When the hunt rode, the wind itself became dangerous. Lights were dimmed, fires were kept low but steady, bells were hung on doors and livestock to create confusion. Iron objects were placed near thresholds and beds. Dogs were hushed, for their howling was believed to draw attention. If the sound of hooves thundered across frozen ground, you stayed inside. If voices screamed in the wind, you did not answer. If the sky seemed alive, you did not look up. Those caught outside risked being taken, dragged into the sky, cursed or driven mad. But the hunt was not purely malevolent. It enforced order. It punished those who thought themselves above consequence. On this night, no promises were made lightly. No boasts were spoken. Words carried power, and power attracted attention. And as the fourth night ended, exhaustion settled in. Not physical alone, but spiritual exhaustion. The household had survived the opening nights of Yule. The fire still burned. The sun had begun its slow return. But the most treacherous nights were still waiting. And everyone knew it. Until next time, stay strange, stay curious, stay spooky, and always preserve Halloween.